Hi, everyone. In today's lecture, I want to talk a little bit about how both elites and common people learned about witches during the Middle Ages. So, if we want to talk about how people learned about witches or the dissemination of the witch idea, let's talk about witch literature. Members of the church or members of the wealthy elite, they're the only people that can read. So when we look at witch literature, like the Malleus Maleficarum from the Dark Middle Ages, only a small segment of the population would actually be reading these books. So it's always, we got to be careful when we look at texts about witches. We've got to remember that that only influenced a really small portion of who actually was participating in the witch hunts. The vast majority of people were hella poor and totally uneducated. Like there weren't concepts of universities or even really schools at this point in Europe. So where do poor people learn about witches? It's not that they learned about them from reading books. They learned about them from going to trials. People during the Dark Ages, they don't have television. They don't have the internet. They don't even have books. So how are they going to entertain themselves? Yo, did you hear that in the next village over, they are having a trial tomorrow? There's this girl that everyone is sure can do magic, and they're gonna like decide if she's a witch and then tie her to a post and set her on fire. Do you want to go? It's gonna be so interesting. Yeah, bro, let's go watch that. That sounds cool, right? So people learned, poor people, the masses, most people learned about the witches from the trials. And ideas about witchcraft were shared in trials. So that's why the trial becomes such an important part of the whole witchcraft experience, because that's how information about it was shared. And so punishing witches becomes the avenue by which you teach about witches. It automatically planted in people's minds that witchcraft and accusation and punishment must go together, even more than like witchcraft and religion. Witchcraft, accusation, punishment, those ideas have to go together. And so that's why even today, when politicians are upset that they are being accused of things or that they might be punished of things or might be impeached for things, right? They scream about witch hunts because those ideas are inextricably tied together in the Western, like European, like white people conception of witches. So, as I was saying, not everybody could read. In fact, almost no one could read. So, we try not to focus too much on the texts related to witchcraft. Like, that's for the historians. We try to focus as anthropologists on more of the cultural explanations, but it's still really important for you to know a couple of the super important documents that come out of the Middle Ages that are connected to witchcraft because, well, one, you're going to read some of them in this class, but also they're referenced in a lot of the literature. So like you need to know that vocab. And the most important one is the Malleus Maleficarum. This was printed in the late 1400s, and it was a manual for inquisitors. It was a manual for witch hunters or for people who were holding witch trials. It pretty much just talks about black magic and what different types of black magic are and what should be done to people who practice this black magic. It's a very tedious text, and that's because it wasn't for the average person at all. It was designed for people who already knew a bunch about the religious background, who already were really, really heavily ensconced in the politics of the region. It was for inquisitors. So it was for uber elite people who wanted to read a super dry manual for how to deal with witches. And this is different than the Compendium Maleficarum. The Compendium Maleficarum is an Italian guide to witchcraft. It comes about 100 years later after the Malleus Maleficarum, and this is a book that is focused on how witches do all sorts of things with the devil. It's focused on diabolism. You've probably seen this text before. You've probably seen the image that's up on my screen, because unlike being a really boring manual just full of blocks of text that are really laborious to read through, this was much more like an everyman's guide to witches. And as a result, like half the book are just these giant, beautiful block prints. They're these wood block prints like the one that's on your screen that depicted the devil in all these really interesting ways. Like there's some of the best depictions of Satan from the Middle Ages and from the beginning of the Renaissance period. And so in many ways, they were much more accessible to people. Even if you couldn't read, you could look at the fucking pictures and be like, That dude, the one that's on your screen right now, is getting blessed by the devil. He's being baptized by the devil. I know what baptism looks like. Ah, the devil baptizing a witch. I'm scared of that. Kill the witches, right? You don't need to be able to read the text and go into a big treatise about the role of this. No, you see that, you're like, the devil's evil. I know what to do. So this is a document which was much more accessible to the average person, but also contributed to that mob mentality because you couldn't read the fine details if you were just an ignorant peasant. But you definitely could understand that that dude and the devil were doing something that they were not supposed to be doing. Whew. Please go back and make sure you understand the Labach text. We're going to be talking about it more in section this week. Thanks so much for your time.